Hi everyone, my name is Jordan Packer and I'm a PhD student here at UCLA in geography. And today I'm presenting The East River is Not a River, Streams of Care at the Water's Edge. The East River is the heart of the city of New York. It connects the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, as you can see here on this map if you haven't been. And in virtually all travel in New York City, you move under or over the East River through tunnels or across bridges or even using a tram. But the East River is not considered place in its own right. So conceptualizing the East River as place offers a route to unsettle our relationship to it and to understand water as a connective force between us beyond a setting or a backdrop. So this paper invites place-based inquiry to the East River, privileging alternative forms of knowing and facilitating collective care when we gather at the water's edge together. I ask, what can embodiment teach us about local water and our relationship to it? And I look specifically at a practice conducted at the East River's edge by the Hydrofeminist Map Collective, a social practice group that explores our connection to water. So the East River, New York City, and its surrounding land is the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. And for thousands of years, Lenape people have lived in New York City near the local waterways before the area was violently colonized by Dutch settlers in the 17th century. While the Lenape people learned the land and waters and lived in relation to them, the Dutch viewed water as a lifeless resource, developing the river's shore into industrial ports and polluting local waterways. And the difference to note here is intentionality and attunement versus extraction, water as a relative or water as a commodity. And settlers in New York have misunderstood and mistreated the land and water for centuries. As an illustration of this, the East River is not actually a river. It is a tidal estuary, which means that the water flows both directions with the changing of the tides, offering connection and rhythmic exchange. This misclassification is a small but significant example of the ways that settler colonialism in New York City misunderstands the natural world. And furthermore, the name East River brings the focus back to land and humans positionally. The water is east of the land, Manhattan. This centering of humans and human-conceived interpretations offers a compelling point of entry into the ways that settlers do not understand water as its own entity. So today, human relations to the environment are still prioritized over the environment's agency and tendencies. And in a city surrounded by water, urban life is disconnected from local waterways. These settler colonial relations to water are limiting and create human-nature stratifications. So to create new relationships with urban waterscapes, we must look to alternative ways of intentionally relating to our more than human peers. So I look to embodiment as a counter-offering. Embodiment is a phenomenological attunement to one's own senses and personal experience. Many scholars have written about embodiment as a method from a variety of different vantage points and disciplines, but most of this scholarship highlights how embodiment challenges the Western supremacy of cerebral understanding by bringing both the mind and the body together. And importantly, embodiment is felt differently by every person. Individual identities like race, gender, and disability influence how our bodies are interpreted by others and perceived by ourselves. Embodiment brings these differences to the foreground, highlighting the different ways we each experience space. Second, I frame this work as unsettling urban water, not to pretend that this is decolonial. Decolonial is a word that refers to explicit land back to indigenous sovereignty, and unsettling begins to take apart these structures, but is only the beginning of the journey to land repatriation. So to unsettle our relationship to urban water, I look to indigenous feminisms, such as radical relationality, which maybe we'll hear more about later today, as the connection, interdependence, and respect between humans and the more than human. And I want to note that I come to this land and water as a non-native person, a positionality that's important to emphasize when thinking with indigenous feminisms and local water. And finally, I end with hydrofeminism, which is an embodiment practice that attunes to the water in, between, and among our collective bodies across humans, plants, animals, and the local waterways. So hydrofeminism acknowledges the way that water defies boundaries. It floats between nations, people, the sky, and land fluidly. And in these ways, Embodiment is a counter-offering that proposes an alternative way to relate to and unsettle our relationships to urban waterways. So the Hydrofeminist Map Collective is an interdisciplinary social practice group with a shared commitment to attunement to local water. This interdisciplinary collective is based in Brooklyn, New York, and includes 4 people listed here, including myself. And we formed a collective because of our joint curiosity about how to care for urban waters that are often predestined for settler colonial and capitalist extraction. The Hydrofeminist Map Collective's sensorial attunement and embodied knowledge are forms of mapping that challenge the fixity of Western maps, envisioning urban water and our bodies as sites of fluid connection. So today I'm going to talk about radiant cold, a practice of the Hydrofeminist Map Collective that occurred in March of 2025. Radiant cold was a practice with the East River, and it began with the premise that we are all bodies of water, and we can explore questions, memories, and sensations that surface when we gather at the East River's edge together in the winter. So keep in mind this was New York in March, so it was actually cold. This practice was a 1-hour silent ritual that paired warming movements with attentive listening to the water and to each other. And radiant cold occurred on consecutive Saturdays at 4 of the only locations with direct East River access, with no fencing to separate humans from the shore. And these are Valentino Pier in Red Hook, Brooklyn, Marsha P. Johnson State Park in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Hallett's Cove, Astoria, Queens, and Barretto Point Park in Hunts Point, Bronx. While the setting was always different, the movement score we used was the same. By conducting this practice in community, we constructed broader reflections and interventions together, forming new knowledges and relationalities. As people gathered for our radiant cold practice, we offered tea and hand warmers, and we shared ephemera to be dispersed, these postcards, which detailed each shore, the score we would practice together, and reflection questions. We also included information specific to the date, the weather forecast, the rhythm of the tides, as well as the dynamic character of the shoreline through 4 points in history, which you can see as an example on the left here. And then looking to the postcard on the right, our practice involved 6 steps as a collective: diaphragmatic breathing, shivering, witnessing the water, warming through the heat of our backs, listening to the water, and reflecting on the experience together. And to begin, we conducted a brief spatial acknowledgement, asking each visitor to reflect on their own understanding and experiences of this shore. Throughout the score, we kept our bodies in contact through our shoulders, hands, or back. We imagined the fluidity in our bodies connecting through our touch and through our breath. The practice moved through stillness and fluidity while attending to water. In moments of stillness, the cold and the wind felt stronger. In moments of movement, our bodies could warm and reconnect. And after the practice concluded, we circled together and draped a patchwork of Mylar emergency blankets over our heads and shoulders. And as you can see here, each person had to hold a corner of the shelter to keep each other warm. And we took this moment to reflect on and record our experiences and imaginaries. Radiant cold left me with a strong sense of collectivity between myself and the water and between myself and the other participants. It reinforced the ways that shared attention can reorient our relationship to water and foreground our bodies and each other. Simultaneously, this practice demonstrated the weight that water carries through histories of trauma, pain, and death. Barretto Point Park, for example, stands directly across the water from the Rikers Prison Island, a New York State prison with a long history of violence and abuse of incarcerated people. And in this way, the East River was a barricade to keep us away from the state-sanctioned violence that was occurring across the water. And so I think about the way that the water carries both: memories of pain, memories of joy, memories of emancipation, and memories of enclosure. Experienced concurrently with the trauma of Rikers, radiant cold allowed us to hold each other and care for one another, and we became in sync with each other's breath and footsteps, moving as one. And this synchronicity created physical support. So radiant cold rejected Western masculinist research methodology in favor of a collective embodied practice. The water between and among us formed a connective force that brought us together and reminded us that the separations between our bodies don't exist to water. This practice was ephemeral and disperses with us. It's decentralized and continues through each of our bodies, memories, conversations, this presentation, printed ephemera, and photographs. By centering attunement to water, we positioned ourselves as responsive to the water's ebbs and flows, and this responsiveness is an important first step for settlers to imagine themselves as guests on Indigenous lands and waters. Social practice art evokes a visceral and emotional response and illustrates a re-understanding of what constitutes knowledge, unsettling relationships to urban water. Building new relationships to water will transform extractive logics into relations of reciprocity that can build a desirable future. And the Hydrofeminist Map Collective is demonstrating how we can intervene and create subversive relationships with the East River, imagining water as more than a commodity for consumption. And to close, I want to say that these lands and waters are Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. And thinking with Indigenous feminisms and unsettling our relationship to urban water offers only a starting point into explicitly decolonial frameworks of land rematriation and Indigenous stewardship. This is a beginning, and this is a beginning aimed towards settlers. Thank you.